Hello, people, and welcome to Johnny Vedmore Read Throughs. Today I'm going to go back in time. I always remember this as being June or July 2016. I kind of give myself an extra year of fine journalism in doing that. But I'm always surprised to see that it was June 2017 that I wrote this article, and it was Theresa May's father, the serial killer, the traveler's daughter, and the cover-ups. And this was the first time that I really realized, I had already realized that some people were going to read me, and that if I wrote the right story that was about something interesting and had a factual basis, that people would share it around and say, "Oh, that's interesting." But this was the first time where that went wild, and within no time, like a couple of days, it was almost 250,000 views. And for someone who's just like I had no really infrastructure at that point to put out properly. I had no mailing lists or anything. I don't really have that much anymore, but I didn't have the following capacity that I had on any of the platforms. And it was all it just spread. It spread like wildfire. It was perfect. It was just before the elections between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn. And of course, the title, as you can see, is a fantastically interesting title. And look at that! Look at that picture. There you go. There she is. There she is. So it's a 12-minute read. It says, I never know about that. I always read it slow and in accents, but it is the shortest article, and the last articles I think I've done read throughs for. So, Theresa May's father, the serial killer, the traveler's daughter, and the cover-ups by Johnny Vedmore. Me, published 6 years ago. It was top story in June 2017 on Vocal Media. Anyway. Theresa May's father, Reverend Hubert Brazier, was born on the 20th of August in 1917 at 61 Clonmore Street, Wandsworth, London. Like many people a century ago, his was a home birth. Hubert's father, Tom Brazier, was a military man. He had served as a sergeant in the King's Royal Rifles, but was a clerk by the time Hubert was born. Hubert's mother's maiden name was Amy Margaret Patterson, and they had married 8 years prior in Hampshire. Amy and Tom's first son, James David Brazier, had died within a year of his birth in 1911 in Uttaranchal, India, where Tom Brazier had been deployed whilst in service. 2 years later, in 1919, Hubert was joined by his younger sister and only other sibling, Jean Robina Brazier. By 1938, Hubert Brazier was 21 years old and attended Leeds University. On the 27th of April 1939, preempting World War II, Neville Chamberlain's cabinet introduced limited conscription. Single men between the ages of 20 to 22 were now eligible to be called up for compulsory military service. A month later, the Military Training Act was passed in the UK House of Parliament. On the 3rd of September 1939, World War II began, and the Military Training Act became the National Services Armed Forces Act, which increased liability of call-up to men aged 18 to 40. In the year 1940, Hubert Brazier, then 23, had a decision to make. As a man of his age in the early years of World War II, he was probably heading to fight the Nazi Wehrmacht or heading to defend British colonial outposts. Hubert Brazier felt his only path was that of the Anglican Catholic Church, and he joined the priests at the Community of the Resurrection Seminary School in Mirfield, West Yorkshire. In years to come, the Community of the Resurrection would become known for the systematic sexual abuse of children at the seminary by Italian Verona brothers, who were rampant sex offenders in the 1960s and 1970s. However, the seminary in Mirfield in the early 1940s was about to start welcoming its first refugee children. In December 1941, mass bombing of Sheffield and other northern industrial towns meant children were evacuated to the countryside. The residents of Mirfield were some of the first to support the war effort and receive evacuees. The community of the Resurrection had only been founded at the latter part of the 1800s. The people of Mirfield took some time getting used to having some of the single men of the seminary walking around the village. One Mirfield resident recalled them being referred to as the Petticoat Men of the Resurrection. In the early 1900s, the residents of Mirfield grew suspicious of the men of God, and this climaxed into a protest outside the Black Bull in Mirfield proper. Father Frere, a talented musician who was popular with the locals, stood on a chair and used his preaching talents to good effect. The community in Mirfield and the community of the Resurrection were tight-knit unit by 1940s. When the northern industrial hub of England began to be targeted by the Luftwaffe nightly, many children from all over England were evacuated communities such as Mirfield. Hubert Brazier would only stay in Mirfield for the beginning of his training. In 1942, he was designated to a new church in London, and after a year of hands-on priestly experience, he would be ordained. Hubert's first placement was the Church of St. Andrews on Sandhurst Road in Catford, Southwark. The bombings were numerous in Catford, and the community were very close, soon to be brought closer by tragedy. On the 20th of January 1943, a bomb landed directly on the local Sandhurst primary school. 38 children were killed alongside 6 teachers. To be a man of God in this devastated community would have meant sharing a lot of suffering and loss. The parents of many of the lost children agreed for them to be buried in mass graves at Hither Green Cemetery, and for terraced memorial to be laid in their honour. Theresa May's father was still a bachelor priest at this point in history. During the war life, the whole of London could be savage. The bombing brought death daily to Lewisham, and the number of funerals were overwhelming for all the local religious institutions. When war ceased, Hubert continued to serve the Anglican Catholic community of Catford until 1948, where he was relocated to Reigate in Surrey and the very small steeple-free Church of St. Luke in South Park area. In contrast to the Church of St. Andrews in Catford, St. Luke's was almost a retirement. Obviously, the stress and strain of war experience had affected the still single Hubert, and the transfer made for good respite. In 1952, Hubert had reached the age of 35, and as in Mirfield at the turn of the century, celibacy provided more questions than it answered. Communities were already rife with gossip and speculation about the private lives of others. It can be presumed that the Anglican Catholic Church's history of child abuse is older than just 60 years, and it would usually be easier for a priest to be married. The serial killer. The following year, in 1953, Hubert Brazier became chaplain All Saints at Eastbourne Hospital in Sussex. Over the next 6 years, he would work alongside the famous serial killer, Dr. John Bodkin Adams. For those who are unaware of Dr. John Bodkin Adams, he was believed to be the Harold Shipman of his age. He would usually prey upon his more elderly patients, convincing them to put him into their wills, of which over 130 complied. They were soon given an injection by Bodkin Adams and would conveniently pass away of natural causes soon after. On review, more than 165 of the deaths that John Bodkin Adams oversaw were seen as suspicious. The suspicion was not a well-kept secret amongst staff at Eastbourne Hospital. Most of the nurses had voiced their concerns to their superiors. They were believed to have been ignored on purpose, as the newly founded NHS was considered to be under political threat, and a scandal that could see the general practitioner sentenced to death was to be avoided at all costs. The problem was Dr. Bodkin Adams just couldn't stop himself. He was being protected by Lord Gwyn, who was believed to be his secret gay lover and was an extremely well-connected politician. Hubert Brazier would have given last rites to many of those killed by Adams. He may have even confessed taking confessions from Bodkin Adams himself, who, when asked by the press if he was guilty of stealing from old women, said, "I have made my peace with God over that." Eastbourne Hospital is where it is believed that Theresa May's mother, Zadie Marie Barnes, met Hubert Brazier for the first time. Hubert was 11 years her senior, and Zadie had already been diagnosed with MS and was regular visitor to Eastbourne Hospital. Whether or not in the 1950s society it was considered appropriate for a celibate hospital chaplain to marry a patient, that's what happened in 1955. Zadie and Hubert were married in Reading in front of Zadie's father, Reginald James Barnes, whose profession is recorded in the wedding certificate, as a traveller. On October the 1st, 1956, Theresa Brazier was born in Eastbourne Hospital. The following year, Dr. John Bodkin Adams would be acquitted of murder in a trial that was an obvious cover-up. However, he was convicted on 8 counts of forging a prescription, 4 counts of making false statements on cremation forms, and 3 offences under the Dangerous Drugs Act 1951. He would be temporarily struck off the NHS, only to be reinstated in 1961 when the proverbial dust had settled. As chaplain of Eastbourne Hospital, Hubert was under the Chichester Diocese of the Church of England. During the 1960s to the 1990s, this diocese had some of the worst examples of child sexual abuse committed by priests. The number and the scope of the phenomenon is truly astounding. Canon Gordon Rideout, who was Vicar of All Saints in Eastbourne, was jailed for 10 years for 36 separate offences on 16 children between 1962 and 1973. Peter Ball, famous Bishop of Lewes, was convicted of abuse in 1980s and 1990s. Former priest Keith Wilk Denford of Burgess Hill and organist Michael Minton were convicted of historic sexual abuse. Vickery House, a former Brighton priest, was also convicted, along with the former vicar of Brede, Roy Cotton. Former vicar of St. Barnabas in Bexhill was charged and convicted of historic allegations, among many others. But Father Hubert Brazier was about to be offered a fantastic opportunity that would take him from the Chichester Diocese. In 1959, Theresa May's father, Hubert Brazier, was installed as the first vicar of Enstone and Haythrop, deep in the Diocese of Oxford. This cannot be understated. It was quite an achievement. Only 4 miles from Chipping Norton, this was a sought-after location, and Hubert would have been the envy of many a man of the Anglican Catholic cough. Hubert is approaching his mid-40s, and it may be time to permanently settle for the sake and sanity of his family. He lives the quiet life in Enstone for 11 years, with only records of baptisms, funerals, and weddings to note his existence. In 1970, Hubert is moved to be vicar of Wheatley in Oxfordshire as Zadie's condition is worsening, and he is no spring chicken anymore. On October the 12th, 1981, Hubert was killed in a car accident on his way to a service at a local church in nearby Forest Hill. His Morris Marina edged out of a central reservation and in front of an oncoming Range Rover driven by a chartered surveyor named Desmond Hampton. Hubert Brazier died of head and spine injuries sustained in the crash soon after. Zadie would pass away a month later. The Oxfordshire coroner, Nicholas Gardner, recorded a verdict of accidental death. The cover-ups. So there is the life of Hubert Brazier. It doesn't seem like there is much to see. Yet, just after Theresa May took over Number 10, her campaign team started to request the deletion of web addresses linked to Hubert Brazier. If you were to go to Wikipedia and type in Hubert Brazier, there will be no results. I first realized that he had once had a wiki entry when I found a version of it in French and then one in Spanish. Any researcher has a wonderfully named Wayback Machine to help them nowadays. You can go to the archive and find pages that have been deleted, only if you can work out the original web address. In this case, if you copy and paste the Wikipedia page address and add Hubert Brazier at the end, you will see Hubert's wiki page in all its former glory from a snapshot archived on the 17th of July, 2016. For some reason, the people around May or May herself do not want you looking into the history of Hubert Brazier. After researching Hubert's life, I came across many pages that had been removed, links to nowhere, and a few conspiracy theories too. On investigation of Hubert's wiki entry, there is nothing damning present. It's not a large entry. It covers only the basics. So why would you want it removed? The only important information it seems to contain is Hubert's placement within the Church of England and that he's Theresa May's father. On the 8th of July 2014, Theresa May, as Home Secretary, oversaw the appointment of Baroness Butler-Schloss to the inquiry set up to investigate child sexual abuse by prominent politicians and clergy in the previous decades. Within 6 days of the announcement of Baroness Butler-Schloss as chair, she was forced to stand down for obvious conflicts of interest. Theresa May had selected somebody whose brother was Attorney General during some of the period being investigated. Later, the same year, May chose the then Lord Mayor of London, Fiona Woolf, to chair the inquiry. Fiona Woolf had to stand down when it became apparent that she had lived near Liam Britton, who had also been accused of sexual abuse. She recalled sending him and his wife a dinner invite at around the time of the accusations. It was almost as if Theresa May was sabotaging the inquiry with no regard for the victims who still required answers. On the 4th of February 2015, May announced that Dame Lowell Goddard, a New Zealand High Court judge, would take over as chair. But a month after Theresa May became Prime Minister in August 2016, the new Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, announced the resignation of Dame Lowell Goddard. Soon after her resignation, it was announced that one of the existing panel members, Professor Alexis Jay, became the chair. But now the inquiry has faced serious and obvious questions about its credibility. To get things so badly wrong must be almost impossible. Theresa May never seemed to meet any of her immigration targets as Home Secretary, and it is truly hard to name her recorded achievements while she has been in office. But the inquiry into child sexual abuse seems to be something Theresa May does not want to face. My thoughts are that the investigation will focus on Tory MPs who frequented the infamous Elm Guest House, but also the Diocese of Chichester, one of the ecumenical homes of her father, Hubert Brazier. So, what is it that you fear, Mrs. May? The truth about your colleagues, or is it something much closer to home? Maybe May is terrified of people connecting her with the name Brazier. I've done my best to build an accurate jigsaw from all the pieces I could locate, but it may need a different set of eyes to see the real picture. Well, that was a big moment for me writing. There you go. That was a big, and if down here is Laura Koonsberg. That was the first pop-up article of this type that I wrote beforehand, published up on the blog. But that is Theresa May. There you go. Theresa May's father, the serial killer, Traveler's daughter, and the cover-up on the Swamp, which is part of vocal.media -- the Swamp -- Theresa / -May - father. And it was an important article for me. Like I say, top story, June 2017. It gave me a little bit of a boost at the start, you know. And that was at the beginning of Vocal being set up. So they obviously liked it. And it covered some interesting stuff. Now, there were a couple of notes made by people afterwards. Loads of it never didn't make the mainstream at all. It went all the way around the place. And some people took didn't like it at all. But there was one person who said that the resurrection in Mirfield, some of that, it was like there was two communities there, but and so it was the one that committed sexual offenses more than the other, but they were both actually using each other's facilities. So I don't quite agree with that. They were both basically mixed community, and Mirfield was a really interesting place. So investigating Mirfield was very interesting. It's an interesting history. There's some people I know from Mirfield. I remember someone saying something to me at around the time saying, I'm from Mirfield, like taking insult insult to the fact that the community is about, like, trying to hold me accountable for the community being not liking the community of the resurrection. And I'm not even not liking them, I'm just reporting what was, they're shooting a messenger. Really interesting. Eastbourne Hospital he goes to work at, and that's where Dr. John Bodkin Adams, a serial killer of high regard. He was one of the best at his job, and that's also where he met Theresa May's mother. And yeah, it's a very interesting article, of course. And there was one person as well who said that told me that this Desmond Hampton, who crashed into Hubert Brazier, has a story that is interesting in itself. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it is interesting to look back on this and say, was this good? Yes, I think it was quite good. There's some spelling mistakes, and I actually corrected them as I was speaking, and especially in the way that I wrote, and commas and spaces. I wrote differently back then. I still use would quite a lot, not as much as I would pass away a month later. I just could say passed away a month later. But yeah, really, thank you for joining me for that read through. It's Johnny Vedmore read throughs. Join me some more sometime. Yeah.
Shaping a great reset for the post-corona era.